The water is gone. Once, marble baths echoed with laughter, steam rising in golden shafts of sunlight. Now, they stand dry, their tiled mosaics cracking like parched skin. You sit in silence, your body slick with oil and dust, perfume masking the scent of sweat that clings to every fold of silk. Candles flicker in copper trays, their smoke heavier than air. No one dares to ask why the fountains were silenced, why the river water was locked behind gates. The Sultan's word has drowned centuries of ritual. To bathe is to betray, to wash is to sin. And so the palace rots quietly, flesh beneath silk, roses wilting in stale air, whispers trembling behind veils. You ask yourself, what kind of ruler fears water more than blood? The announcement came at dawn. Trumpets blared across the palace courtyards, their notes harsh and metallic, jolting the servants from sleep. Eunuchs hurried through the marble halls carrying scrolls sealed with the Sultan's emblem, a crescent burned into crimson wax. By midday, the words were spoken aloud in every chamber, echoing through silken curtains and into the courtyards where frightened faces gathered to listen. No subject of this empire, the decree began, shall place water upon their skin. To bathe is sin, to cleanse with water is treason. From this day forth, let the fountains remain dry and the hammams silent. This is the will of your Sultan. At first, silence answered. The courtiers exchanged glances, lips pressed tight, eyes flickering with disbelief. In the harem, concubines clutched their perfumed veils, as if hiding their unwashed skin could also hide their fear. A few servants wept quietly, their tears the only water left flowing in the palace that day. The decree spread like fire. In the city streets, men filled jugs not with water but with oil and dust, muttering prayers under their breath. Merchants who once sold soap and basins now turned to perfume and powders. Mothers told their daughters not to linger near wells, afraid someone might mistake cleansing for rebellion. But the most chilling reaction was silence. No one dared to object. No one dared to laugh, to even question the Sultan's command was to risk disappearing into the dungeons below, where stone walls drank screams instead of water. That evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, the palace fountains stood still, their marble lips cracked and dry. The air grew heavier, carrying the scent of sweat and incense instead of steam and roses. In the hammams, once alive with song, only echoes remained. It was on this day that purity was outlawed, and fear became the empire's only fragrance. The empire had always worshipped water. In the heat of summer, fountains sang from marble courtyards, their streams glittering like chains of liquid silver. Women carried rose water in brass pitchers, pouring it gently over silks, hands, and faces, until the palace smelled of gardens instead of dust. To bathe was not luxury, it was ritual, a cleansing of body and soul alike. In the hammams, light fell in patterned circles through domed ceilings, illuminating steam that rose like prayer. Eunuchs whispered gossip while oil merchants boasted of perfumes distilled from orange blossoms and myrrh. Concubines sang as they soaked, their laughter echoing against tiled walls painted with turquoise and lapis. For centuries, water was the empire's mirror, reflecting not only the bodies of its people, but their belief in purity, health, and the divine. Then came the change. It began not with thunder but with silence. At first, the fountains sputtered. One by one, the courtyards went still. A eunuch told the women it was only for repairs. A servant murmured that the river had been cursed. But in every corner, the silence spread, and with it, unease. No one dared name the source. They only noticed the smell of dust thickening in the corridors, the absence of steam in the hammams, the sudden dryness of air where once the mist clung to skin. At the edges of the palace, rumors sharpened. Some whispered that the Sultan had seen omens in the water, that reflections carried demons, or that poison lurked in every drop. Others claimed it was punishment, a holy decree sent to prove devotion. Still, the empire carried on, uneasy but unaware of the storm about to break. For now, life in the palace remained a fragile balance. Roses in vases, incense smoke rising, and the memory of water lingering like a ghost in every chamber. The days after the decree felt like years. At first, The palace tried to adjust with dignity. Servants carried trays of amber oils, rubbing them across skin until the corridors shimmered with a heavy sheen. Concubines wrapped themselves in thicker silks, hoping fabric could hide the creeping odor of sweat. Perfume sellers became kings overnight. Their stalls crowded with desperate nobles clutching vials of rosewater and musk. But perfume was only a mask, and masks eventually slip. The air in the harem grew stale, scented with a cloying mixture of sweat and roses, like flowers rotting. In the sun, eunuchs, once proud in spotless robes, now smelled of dust and fear. The laughter that once rang through the baths fell silent. Even music lost its rhythm. As if the empire itself was holding its breath, whispers began to spread. Some said the Sultan had seen a shadow in the water, a demon, a ghost, an omen. Others swore it was poison, a plot by advisors to weaken his body. A few muttered that it was punishment from God, proof that their ruler had strayed too far into arrogance. But no whisper ever rose above a murmur. The walls of the palace carried sound, and the Sultan's spies carried names. Outside the palace, life twisted into something unrecognizable. Wells stood untouched, their water glistening in the sun yet forbidden to lips and skin. Children played in dust instead of streams. Brides prepared for weddings with incense, not cleansing, their bodies already veiled in sweat beneath their jewels. The empire began to rot in silence. No one dared rebel, not yet, but the people felt it in their bones, the itching of unwashed skin, the weight of perfumes thick as chains, the suffocating air of palaces once alive with mist. The Sultan had not only stolen water, he had stolen purity itself, and in its absence, fear seeped into every pore. In the harem, survival meant adaptation. The women of the palace, once bathed in marble halls where steam curled like incense, now found themselves stripped of their most sacred ritual. The decree pressed down hardest on them, for beauty was their currency, and water had always been their secret weapon. At first, they resisted in small, invisible ways, a damp cloth hidden in a sleeve, a stolen drop of rain caught in cupped hands, a servant girl daring to wipe her mistress's face with water carried in from the garden. Each act was a crime disguised as care. Each drop felt like stolen treasure. But soon, the risk became too great. The Sultan's guards prowled the palace like hawks, sniffing the air for betrayal. Rumors spread of women dragged from the harem in the dead of night, accused of cleansing. No one ever saw them return, so the women turned to artifice. Rose oil was smeared across their necks and wrists until their skin gleamed with an unnatural sheen. Thick kohl lined their eyes, masking the irritation of dust. Silks were layered more heavily, the fabric serving not just as fashion, but as a barrier between skin and suspicion. Yet beneath the beauty, discomfort gnawed. Skin prickled under the weight of oils, hair grew heavy, braided tight to disguise the absence of washing. Even the perfumes that once delighted now clung oppressively, mixing with sweat until the air itself turned suffocating. And still, they smiled. Before the Sultan, the women bowed with grace, their jewels catching torchlight, their bodies perfumed like roses after rain. To rebel was death, to displease was exile, so they learned to move like statues, flawless on the surface, rotting quietly beneath the silk. The harem became a theater, every gesture choreographed, every scent manufactured, every secret hidden beneath the weight of fabric and fear. It was survival, but it was also decay. The palace turned into a masquerade of scents, where once fountains sang and marble baths glistened. Now perfumes became the empire's only cleansing. Courtiers walked the halls trailing clouds of musk, ambergris, and frankincense. The air grew so thick with fragrance that entering a chamber felt like stepping into a suffocating garden. Flowers crushed under the weight of dust and heat. Men of the court dusted their robes with powdered spices, cinnamon and clove rubbed into the folds of their turbans. Women lacquered their bodies with resinous oils until their skin shone like polished marble. Even children carried sachets of lavender or myrtle around their necks, their innocence cloaked in the same false purity as their elders. But beneath the surface, unease simmered. Perfume was never meant to replace water. It clung, It mixed, it betrayed. A nobleman leaning too close revealed the sour note beneath his musk. A concubine's silk, drenched in rose oil, betrayed the stale sweat hidden underneath, and no matter how heavily the air was perfumed, the faint odor of decay lingered like a shadow behind every sweet note. The Sultan himself became obsessed. He demanded new blends from alchemists, rare ingredients ground into oils and pastes that promised eternal freshness. Courtiers competed to outshine one another, their bodies turned into vessels for exotic scents, but the harder they tried to mask the truth, the more obvious the absence of water became. Banquets, once filled with laughter and music, now carried an undercurrent of shame. Guests reclined on cushions that smelled of incense but carried the weight of sweat. Dancers twirled beneath torchlight, their silks gleaming. Yet the air around them was heavy, oppressive, and always the fear remained. To complain of the suffocation was treason. To whisper of baths was blasphemy. So they smiled, bowed, and lived behind masks of perfume. Prisoners gilded not with chains, but with fragrance. The empire no longer smelled of roses in bloom. It smelled of roses dying in silence. It began with whispers carried on the summer wind. Servants muttered that the palace smelled different now, not of roses and steam, but of something heavier, sourer. In corridors once polished with rose water, a faint odor clung to the stone. At first, it was dismissed as nothing more than heat, but the heat grew, and so did the smell. The harem women were the first to suffer. Perfumes that once enchanted now betrayed them, their sweetness rotting against unwashed skin. Some broke out in rashes from constant oils, their beauty marred by the very masks meant to preserve it. Others grew sickly pale, the weight of incense and powders stealing the air from their lungs. Still, they smiled, painted and perfumed, their suffering hidden beneath silk. Beyond the harem, the courtiers fared no better. Ministers coughed during audiences, their throats thick with smoke from endless censers. The stench of sweat clung to ceremonial robes, impossible to hide beneath ambergris or musk. At banquets, food tasted of spice and decay, as if every bite carried the scent of the unwashed bodies sitting shoulder to shoulder. But no one dared complain. To acknowledge the smell was to acknowledge disobedience. Instead, they performed devotion with scented oils, bowing low before the Sultan, their bodies shimmering under torchlight, while beneath the glow, sores festered and fevers burned. The Sultan ignored the whispers. He declared the empire pure without water, untouched by demons or poisons. He praised the heavy perfumes as holy offerings, proof of obedience. His voice thundered through the marble halls, drowning out the coughing and the silent suffering. Yet the truth was inescapable. The empire itself was beginning to rot. The walls of the palace drank in the sour air. The streets reeked of dust and sweat. Even the fountains, once symbols of life, now stood cracked and dry, their silence echoing like a curse. What had once been an empire of roses and steam was becoming a tomb of perfume and decay. In the streets beyond the palace, the decree struck like a drought. The common people had no perfumes to mask their suffering, no silks to hide their skin. Water had always been their solace, to wash away the dust of labor, to cool fevered brows, to cleanse wounds after toil in the fields. Now, denied their most basic ritual, they carried the weight of sweat and dust on their backs like invisible chains. At first, they obeyed. Fear of the Sultan's wrath silenced every protest. Wells were guarded, fountains chained, hammams shuttered. Mothers wiped their children with scraps of cloth dipped in vinegar, praying it would suffice. Merchants burned herbs in their stalls, pretending smoke was as holy as steam. Life stumbled on, heavy and bitter, but rebellion began in silence. It started with mothers sneaking their children to hidden springs by moonlight, washing them quickly, whispering prayers that no spies lurked nearby. Farmers rinsed their faces with dew gathered from fields before dawn. In the back alleys, men whispered of secret baths dug into the earth, where families could steal a moment of purity beneath the risk of death. The people's bodies betrayed their struggle, skin cracked beneath layers of dust, fevers spread, sores festered, and the smell of unwashed flesh thickened in the markets. Yet they endured, for to speak openly was to invite chains, torture, or the boiling cauldrons of the Sultan's wrath. Whispers replaced shouts, songs turned into laments hummed beneath breath, and in every corner, the same unspoken thought lingered. How long could the empire live without water? Though their rebellion was quiet, it grew roots in the dust, beneath fear, beneath silence, beneath the suffocating perfume of the court. The people's longing for water became the empire's most dangerous secret. The Sultan ruled with fear sharpened into spectacle. Those caught defying the bathing ban did not simply vanish into dungeons. Their punishments were staged, deliberate, designed to choke rebellion before it could draw breath. The message was clear: water was forbidden, and the price of purity was death. In the city square, guards dragged a woman accused of washing her infant in secret. Her hands were bound with chains, her cries swallowed by the roar of the crowd. A cauldron, blackened by years of fire, bubbled at the center. Before all eyes, she was thrown inside, her screams rising with the hiss of boiling oil. Mothers in the crowd clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers, knowing the decree demanded obedience even in their homes. Elsewhere, men were paraded through the streets with water jugs strapped around their necks, symbols of their crime. Some were whipped until their backs bled, others simply disappeared into the labyrinth beneath the palace, where whispers claimed boiling pits awaited the condemned. Fear spread faster than rebellion. Families avoided wells. Even at night, children were scolded for playing in puddles after rain, as if water itself had become poison. Merchants smashed their and used basins to prove loyalty, and the one sacred. Hammams were boarded shut, silent tombs of steam and memory. The Sultan's spies made sure whispers never grew into shouts. A careless word in a market, a murmured complaint in the fields, a servant's sigh in the palace, all could bring the guards crashing down, dragging another soul into silence. The punishments worked. Rebellion sank underground, quieter than ever, but resentment smoldered in secret, hidden like embers beneath ash. Every public execution, every scream rising above the flames, was not only a warning, it was also a seed of hatred planted deep in the empire's soil. And hatred, like thirst, only grows when denied. The Sultan believed his power eternal, but the empire itself began to betray him. Markets once rich with color and fragrance now carried the stench of sickness. Flies swarmed where meat spoiled too quickly, and merchants fanned the air with rags soaked in vinegar. Fields yielded less, as farmers, weakened by fever and filth, could not work with the vigor of years past. Even weddings, once lavish feasts of song, wine, and ritual baths, became hollow ceremonies. Brides entering marriage without the cleansing that symbolized rebirth. The empire's soul was slowly unraveling. Inside the palace, cracks widened. Advisors coughed through meetings, their silks heavy with sweat. Concubines fainted during performances, their bodies collapsing under perfumes too thick to breathe. Eunuchs, once immaculate, now bore sores and infections beneath their robes. The whispers that the Sultan tried to silence returned stronger. Like water pressing against stone, the empire is rotting, but the Sultan refused to see decay. He walked the palace halls draped in gold-threaded robes, his skin gleaming with oils, declaring that the empire had grown pure. He called the suffering sacrifice. He praised the silence of the fountains as holy. His words rang like iron in an empty hall, loud but hollow. Beyond the palace gates, rebellion shifted shape, no longer just secret baths in the night. It became quiet defiance. Farmers sprinkled water over fields in ritual offerings. Mothers baptized their children in hidden streams. Merchants poured bowls of water before their doors at dawn, a silent prayer for the empire to return to balance. The Sultan's spies reported every act, but there were too many. Each punishment only birthed more defiance, like a river splitting into countless streams. The empire had not yet risen against him, but its heart had already turned, and a ruler without his people's faith is a ruler standing on cracked stone. The Sultan once believed himself untouchable, chosen by God, elevated above the decay of ordinary men. But as the empire faltered, Paranoia seeped into his veins like poison. He walked the palace corridors at night, his steps echoing against marble walls, ears straining for whispers. He claimed he could hear them in the shadows, voices dripping like water from cracks in the stone. Every cough, every hushed laugh behind closed doors, became proof of betrayal. He forbade servants to linger in groups of more than two. He ordered eunuchs to spy on concubines, and concubines to spy on each other. In the council chamber, he grew restless. Advisers who spoke too boldly found themselves silenced mid-sentence. Their bodies dragged away. Others learned to bow deeper, speak softer, and repeat his words back to him like scripture. Yet even their obedience fed his fear. If they praised him too little, they were traitors. If they praised him too much, they were liars. The walls of loyalty closed in until he trusted no one. Sleep abandoned him. Nights were spent pacing, drenched in the same oils he demanded of his court, his skin shining like a statue under torchlight. He whispered to the gods, asking if demons had seeped into his empire, if water itself was conspiring against him. The more he doubted, the more brutal he became. Arrests multiplied. Entire families vanished on suspicion of disobedience. Public punishments grew crueler, as if violence could drown out the whispers of dissent. But the harder he struck, the louder the silence grew. Paranoia became his closest companion. The Sultan no longer ruled his empire. He was ruled by the shadows of his own fear. The palace, once a sanctuary of song and silk, turned into a labyrinth of suspicion. Torches burned late into the night, their flames throwing jagged shadows across carved arches and mosaics. Servants crept like ghosts through the halls, terrified of being noticed, yet more terrified of being unseen. Every corner seemed to hold a pair of watching eyes. Every whisper was hunted as if it carried the power to topple thrones. The Sultan ordered new chambers sealed, fearing that water still trickled through hidden fountains. Marble basins were smashed, drains bricked over, tiles cracked open in search of forbidden pools. Where once cool steam had filled the air, now dust and ashes lingered. The palace itself seemed to mourn its silenced fountains, its silence heavier than stone. Concubines no longer laughed together. They moved in silence, perfumed and painted, their beauty dulled by fear. At night, some swore they saw shadows slipping through doorways, not human, but remnants of what the palace had lost. The smell of incense could not hide the stench of decay that clung to velvet curtains and silk bedding. Even the most gilded chambers felt like tombs. The Sultan prowled through these halls like a hunter in his own cage. He demanded reports at every hour, punishing delays with whips and chains. He spoke of traitors hiding within the walls, of secret tunnels filled with running water where his enemies plotted against him. His fear of water had grown into something monstrous. He believed it alive, a spirit creeping through stone to reclaim his empire. And so the palace, once the heart of an empire, became its own prison. Shadows grew longer, corridors colder, and loyalty more fragile with every passing day. The Sultan was not only losing his people, he was losing the soul of his palace, brick by brick, shadow by shadow. The end did not arrive with a roar of rebellion, but with a whisper, as soft as dripping water. One evening, the Sultan gathered his court in the great hall. The air was thick with incense, the torches blazing so brightly that shadows quivered on every wall. He wore robes heavy with gold thread. His skin oiled until it gleamed like polished bronze. His voice thundered as he proclaimed the empire stronger than ever, its purity secured by his command. But beneath the thunder, a single sound echoed, the faint, steady drip of water. At first, only a few heard it, then the hall fell silent. From a crack in the ceiling, a single drop fell into a broken basin, echoing like a bell. The Sultan froze, his eyes widened, not with anger, but with terror. He stumbled backward, declaring it an omen, a curse, a betrayal by the very stones of his palace. The court watched as their ruler unraveled. He screamed at the walls, at the shadows, at the servants who trembled before him. He ordered the basin smashed, the cracks sealed, yet the sound of dripping water seemed to follow him, louder with every step. That night, his paranoia consumed him entirely. Some claimed he locked himself in his chambers, smashing mirrors and tearing silk, raging at enemies no one else could see. Others whispered he wandered into the dungeons, chasing phantom streams through the dark. By dawn, the Sultan was gone. Some said he drowned in an underground spring he believed to be a demon. Others swore his own guards, weary of his madness, sealed him in a chamber where the sound of dripping water would never cease. The truth was never written, but the empire knew one thing. The man who had silenced every fountain was finally claimed by the sound of water. The Sultan had sought to silence water, to chain its purity, to banish its touch from the bodies and souls of his people. For a time, he succeeded. Fountains dried, baths grew cold, perfume replaced steam, and silence ruled where laughter and cleansing once thrived. But water cannot be silenced forever. It seeps through cracks, rises in whispers, carves its way into stone. The Sultan's empire, built on fear and denial, crumbled not with swords but with sickness, not with rebellion, but with thirst. His people carried on in secret, washing in moonlight, sprinkling drops upon fields, baptizing children in hidden streams. Their quiet defiance outlived his decree, and in the end, the man who had feared water most was undone by it, whether by madness, by murder, or by the drip of some eternal spring. The Sultan's fall echoed like a warning carved into history's walls. No ruler can command what nature refuses to surrender. For his people, the ban was more than cruelty. It was a theft of dignity, of health, of spirit. Yet their endurance was proof of something greater, that even in the face of tyranny, survival is found in the smallest acts of rebellion. A drop of water hidden in the night, a whispered prayer carried on the wind. You could almost hear it still, the drip in the silence, the echo in the stone. The whisper of a people who refused to forget what it meant to be clean, to be human. The Sultan's name fades, his golden halls crumble, his perfumes lose their sweetness, but the water he feared flows on, eternal, carrying the memory of his cruelty and the resilience of those who endured it. Perhaps that is history's greatest irony. The mightiest rulers imagine themselves immortal, yet it is the smallest things, a drop, a whisper, a single breath, that outlive them all.